Welcome to the Citizen Advisory Council meeting for May 12th. Thank you all for coming. The introductions, so we'll do the review of the agenda. We'll have public comment, but nobody's here today. Board member comment, senior leadership comments. Celeste will do the policy committee update. Sabrina's going to lead the policy feedback, and then we'll have time for open discussion. So for the agenda, for the minutes from last time, everybody get a chance to review? I had a motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes as written.
Second. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we have no public comment, so we'll go ahead to the board member comment.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just excited to be here. I'm excited that we're going to be, we recently voted to add some new members to bring some more. But I'm excited today. I wrote down what we have: Walkersville, Linganore, Tuscarora, Frederick, and TJ. So no duplicates here. So 5 of our 10 high school feeders represented. So happy for that. And we kind of didn't necessarily include that in our criteria when we voted in new, because we just want more, frankly, we want more bodies. We stressed that we would love to have representatives, but I understand how hard it is for, say, our Catoctin feeder or Brunswick feeder, but we really are trying to encourage those feeders to participate and be here. We even put out feelers with the charter school to try and see if we can't get some people involved in there. We had some initial interest, but haven't had anything yet. So hopefully we'll continue to expand, and as we get into the policy and regulation discussions, we'll have more people excited to participate as we continue to move through this. I do have what I think for this committee's exciting news, because we're very honored to have Celeste serve on our policy committee and provide reports back. But I got an email from Dr. Dyson and Mr. Blevis today that they would like to add a member of CAC to the regulation committee. So I think that's fantastic to have community representation, not only now on policy, but also in the regulation. So since there's only 5 of us here tonight, what we thought we would do is we'll send out the interest via email to all members, and then we can let Lindsay and the rest determine, because it's a little bit actually larger commitment than even policy. They meet beginning in August. They take the summer off. They've met in May already. They take the summer off, but beginning in August, they meet 2 hours once a month, every month. It is through Google Meet. So it's from 9:30 to 11:30 in the morning, once a month. But we'll send out an email to gauge the interest of someone, and then we'll kind of go through a process to select the person that would like to make that commitment to that, because that would be, I'm guessing around that, probably be 9 meetings, maybe 8 or 9 meetings. I'm sure they follow a similar schedule where they don't meet around the holidays and things like that. But it would be 8 or 9, a commitment to 8 or 9 meetings. And I think I want to thank Celeste, because I think you've missed 1 policy. Because of that selfish trip to Florida you took, chaperoning our FCPS students. But we appreciate that. So it's a big commitment to do that, and we want parent and community input, and I think that's exciting when I got this email today that we can have someone on both parts of the process, because the policy side is the what we want to accomplish, what we're trying to accomplish with our policy, and then the regulation is the actual how the system's going to implement the policy that the Board of Education determines they want implemented. So I think it's exciting to have representation at both levels.
That's amazing. I'm so excited about that. That's amazing. Yeah.
So I'm really, when I got that email, I was very excited that they would like that level of participation. So I'm excited to be here. Look forward to having at our next meeting in September, right? At our next meeting in September, hopefully we'll have a larger group, but appreciate the 5 of you that are here and prepared to go through the exercise that Sabrina and Dr. Alavita put together for us so we can work toward similar goals. So thank you. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Next up, senior leadership comments.
Well, I'm going to make my comments brief because Sabrina really does have an excellent activity planned for us this evening. We're going to get some good feedback on 2 of our policies that are coming up. And so I'm going to keep this brief. Mr. Rose asked how my day was when I sat down, and I said it was fine. And really, it was a good day, but boy is May busy, and you all are living it as well. If you have kids, and then in a school system, we are winding down this school year, and we are in full swing already planning for next school year. And for our administrators, who I work very closely with, we have to have everything ready to go for them for the whole next year, and pretty much by the time this school year ends. So busy time, but I wanted to focus on Teacher Appreciation Week last week. Wonderful week in FCPS, of course, for educators across the country. And our community and our parents show up so big in our schools, and I just wanted to say thank you for that. I was talking with principals who were listing off something that they were doing every single day of the week with our PTSAs. Really taking the lead. So we appreciate you. We appreciate when you show appreciation for our teachers and when you come to the table and partner with us on all things. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, Celeste, policy committee update.
Okay, so the policy committee update is going to be short because I'm pretty sure that anything I was going to say is going to be covered in the future exercises that we're doing. But just briefly, like the policy, like Mr. Rose said, it's the why, it's the what. Like this is what the Board of Education and the offices want to do, and the regulation piece is the how we're going to do it. So I really think it's amazing to have someone else on that regulations committee, because a lot of times the how is what we see as parents, as teachers, as building level staff. Like that's, you see the how, like how do we decide what books go into a library, or how do we discipline someone for being late 5 times, or those are all the things that we come and we talk about these things, but that's not exactly the policy piece, that's more of the regulation piece. So I think it's great to kind of add that in and kind of complete the puzzle for this group. It took us a long time to learn about the differences between the policy and the regulations. So I'm just excited about that, and we've had a lot of great policy discussions in the past couple of months, but next week we do have a big policy committee meeting coming up, so I am excited to hear about this discussion and kind of get into the meat of all of that with you guys. So I am finished. Write that down because that never happens. So thank you.
On this day at 6:13.
That's right. For that.
No going back.
Cold start for you too. Okay, so now we're going to turn it over to Sabrina for the policy feedback portion.
So I'm going to hand out some packets, and if we talked a little bit about already, sure. So we talked about the differences between policy and regulation. So let me pause right there and just broadly ask, are there any questions about the understanding and the overview of the difference between a policy and a regulation? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so CAC has been charged based upon our policy, the Board Policy 101, that we report directly to the board. We serve as a channel to address different things. It's kind of open to board direction, but we share public concerns as identified by the board. And it's one of those could be to gauge public opinion on topics related to public concerns, as they see fit, which is part of what we're doing with the review of these 2 policies that we'll be looking at, and prepare information on topics and issues raised by the board. So policy 443 is a policy that has been gauging quite a bit of feedback from the community. You have a copy of that policy here and also of policy 444. Policy 443 is titled Creating Welcoming and Affirming Schools for Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Students. Policy 444 is Educational Equity and Excellence Policy. So both of these policies are scheduled to be reviewed by our policy committee. The process is it will go to policy committee first. They review these policies and then make recommendations, make changes. It could come back to policy committee for continued discussion, or it would then go on to the board for a first reading for additional information. So there's a few different pathways, but first is getting that understanding of what does the board and the community, what are we looking for? How do we want to move forward? The board is asking for public feedback in regards to this and to, again, address board regulations along with regulations from Maryland State Department of Ed. So there are some guidelines within that they must follow, and COMAR guidelines. So both of those are part of the making of that policies in general. The layout of the policy, let me explain that a little bit. So when you're looking at the policy, our policies start with a policy purpose. They go on to definitions, and then a statement about the policy, and then into implementation or different sections about implementation for that policy. On the back of these policies, or toward the end of these policies, it states when the policy history, when the policy was last reviewed. So for policy 444, it was last reviewed in 2023. So that's not long ago. Versus policy 443 was last reviewed in 2000, was revised in 2019. We have a wide range of policies and the times that they've been reviewed, so these two are coming up in the cycle, and something that we're looking for feedback on. So we're going to look at a process to get some thinking from members of CAC in regards to these two policies. And there's this, when you're looking at a policy, sometimes some of the things that you want to jump to is to make suggestions about the policy. We're going to try and go through this ladder of feedback that you have a paper in regards to that starts with clarifying, asking questions to understand about the policy, and then looking at what do you value, what's important to you within these policies, what stands out, and then looking at what are some of the concerns. It seems to you you're wondering about, some things may not be clear or may not make sense to you, and then looking at some of those suggestions of how can you make it clear, how can it make sense, how can you talk about this value in a different way. And so we want to go through these steps to explore and have that understanding. The next page is a feedback page, which kind of ties in with the ladder of feedback and talks about when you're clarifying, if you have something that you want clarified, to circle it. So you can do that directly on the policy, or you can make comments on this feedback page, whichever is easiest for you, or a combination of both. Then what do you value? So put a star next to it. You really like this, and you can talk about the why, because, or you don't, again, what is important that you want to see stay in this policy. Then the concerns, again, example of the exclamation point, I wonder about this, and then the suggestions is the check mark. So we're going to go through the policy first individually, and this is all anonymous. So I'll be collecting the papers back for that feedback and then summarizing the feedback for the board committee to review. But we're looking at feedback from a personal, individual perspective. And then we'll go into small groups to kind of talk about some things. And maybe somebody said something that makes you wonder more or clarify it more. And then you go from there, and then we'll collect the feedback. We can talk publicly about it if you want. But again, I'm looking for more of that documentation on paperwork so that we also have that clarity and able to bring everything together.
Yeah, I think so. I think, like I said, you can use both papers You can use but you can also articulate in the notes section on here any specific questions that you have, concerns. One of the big things about this particular committee is I want to make sure that this committee is always like a safe space, a safe ear, a safe voice in what we're trying to accomplish. And I hope that you'll be able to be an ear in the community and bring those concerns back here. Sometimes one of the hardest things we have to do is temporarily, we have to kind of park our own personal opinions when communicating with the public so that we can get honest feedback from the public, your neighbors, your friends, your kids' friends, family friends, things like that, and then bring it back to us. And then feel comfortable sharing your both personal perspective and the perspectives that you're hearing.
And the review process for the policy committee could be a lengthy process. So this may be an ongoing review for them.
I'm confident that we will use the feedback that we gather tonight, but that we'll also have an opportunity to gather more feedback when we meet in September. At absolute best case scenario is that we will discuss 443 and 444 next Wednesday. It's almost totally going to be information gathering. And then staff and the policy committee will begin to formulate any modifications or changes to either policy. It will stay in policy committee, certainly, at least until the meeting in August. Will be the first time it will even come back to policy committee to review even a consideration of any of the changes. I still think, even best case scenario, it will probably be 2 more months before it exits policy and into the full board. So we're gonna have some multiple opportunities to not only talk about what went on probably in the next 2, when we meet in September, we'll have an opportunity to discuss what went on in at least 2 policy committee meetings, and then provide even additional feedback.
So we're going to go ahead and start with policy 443. And then I'd like to take start as individual, probably 15 minutes or so, to read through the policy, make your markings, put your questions. I have pens if anybody needs a pen also. And I'll be floating around, so if you have questions, I'm happy to address what's listed here. But we're looking for your thinking mostly right now. So,
Sabrina, so we can do whichever one works best for us. We can just annotate right on the policy,
absolutely.
or we can fill out the worksheet.
Yes.
You just want one or the other.
Yep.
Okay.
Or both.
Or both.
Or both.
both.
Or both. You
I'll be
can-
collecting
yep.
all of it back.
Perfect.
You can make notes on either or,
Okay,
or
perfect.
both. Whatever you're most comfortable with, or whatever gives you the opportunity to offer more input or feedback. For full transparency, so you know, I'm not only the representative of the board here, I am the chair of the policy committee, so that you know.
Another 3 minutes, and then we'll talk with our shoulder partner. If you want to do it.
Like, is that a star or a circle?
So if you're ready to connect with another member, or if anyone wants to share publicly, you can have discussion now or after you start first with your neighbor, and then we can move on to if anybody wants to share their comments. So go ahead and connect with neighbors around you. Or if y'all want to get to, there's 5 of us.
Neighbors. Yeah, like,
Right.
We can all be neighbors.
even though Chris is all the way over there.
It's not personal.
I got you.
Coward.
And don't feel like you have to. We just wanted to provide the opportunity.
So one of the things, as I was reading through it, the second paragraph under purpose, about halfway through when it talks about the Board of Education acknowledges that the transfer of students who are victims of bullying, the remainder of that piece seems odd because in this entire thing, it's about behaviors, what's acceptable, what's not. Of all of the remedies or punishments or whatever, that A seems like a really weird placement, because it seems like figuring out who's going to get moved is the purpose. And it's also the only, you don't talk about anything else. You don't talk about, one of the things that I was grappling with in here is also in that paragraph, it says, responding as, and such response should only be considered in consultation, agreement, or at the request of the victim and his or her parent or legal guardian. That was the only place in this entire policy that actually explicitly states that the student and the parent or guardian must agree. Everywhere else in here, it's like, we're going to talk to the student, which I support. But what if my second grader doesn't agree with her dad, which has happened 42 times today? The policy doesn't in any way, shape, or form talk about that. It simply says, my second grader trumps me. And again, cool, because I happen to trust the specific school she's in. So, but if you're trying to write a policy that is going to apply to all students across the district, not only that, the policy seems to be, in my reading at least, unduly focused towards what do we do for these kids when they're almost graduating? A lot of this seems very focused to the second half of high school. If I'm interpreting a lot of this stuff and those freedoms, there's a whole lot of people feeling comfortable that happens a whole lot before they're 14, 15, 17, 18. It seems to be lost. The nuance seems to be lost in the policy.
I had some similar thoughts regarding parents struggling with understanding, I put like their rights compared to their child's rights. That it is very common for parents to not understand where that line is and be comfortable with it depending on the circumstances and not just education. And I also had made a note about particularly, I wrote it down in training, but hearing what you have to say, I agree about needing training at different levels and what that might look like at the varying levels, because the way you respond to an elementary schooler is going to be different than a middle schooler or a high schooler. We are seeing a lot more questioning of things at a younger age, not just high school. And I understand why they had to put in here things about sports and PE and locker rooms and things like that and overnights. But that was one of the concerns that I wrote down, is parents feeling where they belong and where they don't belong and being uncomfortable with that. I also specifically noted that in the overnights, with parents, I can see some really struggling if their child on the other side is put with somebody that they don't have any knowledge or permit, they're not giving any permission for, and then they find out after the fact, and that creates problems. And I understand the need, and I agree with the need for confidentiality in a lot of these circumstances, but it's a really difficult policy to write, to be honest.
Like this is it. Like it's to me, it's super dicey because I think that there has to be, and it doesn't appear to exist, at least in the policy. Maybe it does as it filters into the how we implement. But so when you have a parent who doesn't understand, can't wrap their head around, here's who my kid is and what they need. FCPS seems to be taking a stance of, we're going to stand in the middle of this. We're going to stand in the middle of this discussion. But what are you going to do? Like, what is the purpose of how this is going to help bridge the gap between a child going through something, a student going through something that they need to go through in their life, and a parent who does or doesn't understand? And if there is that conflict, like as a parent, I have certain obligations. Forget my parental right to tell my kid what they must do. I also have certain obligations to get them safely through this world. How does FCPS envision themselves? And I don't have an answer to this, but how does FCPS envision themselves playing in the middle of that? If, not necessarily a referee or a counselor, like, I don't know, like, is somewhere in here is a purpose of an FCPS sees themselves in this role. I see a student here. I see them trying to navigate safely, expressing who they are, and here is how we see ourselves as addressing when it doesn't work out cleanly. Because if it works out cleanly, I don't think we have any issues. Who cares? But what about all of the times that it's not going to? Not necessarily in a violent way, but in an uncomfortable way. So,
I have the same section that Brennan mentioned.
Me too.
Circled, and so I like
Exactly
read off your
circled.
paper. But I think I like the content a lot. I think just the placement feels like kind of, I couldn't quite figure out like, but I think the way you worded it is perfectly. I
And I
think
feel
it's
like
like
there's
good
a lot-
content, but it's not the right. It's under focus, which I think is not the right section.
it deserves a section, and the section
Yes.
deserves a lot more than just that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that it was an odd discussion to me about the transfer of students. Transfer of school is not a preferred mode of responding. It's almost like when we write the policies, we're saying what we would like to do, or what we want to see happen. And I kind of feel like that tone is a little bit not congruent with the way we like things to be worded. I mean, we have positive intent, right? When we're creating these policies, like this is what we want to do, and this is how we want to make a better school system for our students. So I feel like that it kind of had this is not the preferred mode. I mean, yeah, people transfer schools, and it can happen, and it's all over policy in all kinds of different places. But I do feel like that was definitely out of place too.
And I actually I had to cross it off of my sheet because I missed the second part of the statement where it said, or at the request of the victim and or parent, because I think I got a little lost in the beginning because it felt like it. To the other point about age, I was wondering the same thing about if it needed to be broken out, because it says a lot developmentally, but if that needs to be broken out more specifically in relation to, like, again, your second grader is a little different than like high school student, and like how that's going to be handled.
And I think even if has the flexibility to be, for example, elementary kind
Yes.
of thing,
Yeah.
not
Totally.
specifically elementary, but if we have the flexibility to say this is how it might look, or these are the concerns we may address at each of these levels, because we have fifth graders who may need it versus, in a different way than like a second grader. That gap is really wide in that.
And I think some of it is captured in there was a section about flexibility. Oh yeah, right here, under the policy statement of flexibility. I really liked that statement, so I think it's capturing some of it, but could like be expanded maybe. Because it's saying based on, needs, so.
Another weird question under definitions, under the first one for bullying, harassment, and intimidation. Substantially interfering. Is that a legal term? It has its own definition? Okay, cool.
I had suggestions under definitions as well. We don't define sex. So like under purpose, second paragraph, first line, or real sex, it doesn't define it then later on what that means. But then we kind of reference it later on in a different way.
I think those words get thrown around a lot in conversation.
Correct.
Sex, sexual orientation, gender. What is sex? What is gender?
Defined at birth, use that later on in
Yes,
the
birth
policy, but we
design,
don't
right.
use it earlier on.
Yeah, and then that sentence kind of read weird to me because I'm like, perceived or real sex. Like, what do you mean by
The
that?
word
Do you know what I
kind of
mean?
is gonna get some people, I have a feeling.
Yes, because I think that's a really subjective word.
Androgynous probably needs to also be defined, I think.
And I think some of
Gender
these-
nonconforming.
Yeah, I think some of these phrases have also kind of evolved since
Yeah.
this was written.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
some of
And
the
then
terms
there's
are
even more
outdated.
specific
Yes.
Yeah.
definitions.
Like I did not
of
like
gender, et cetera.
non-conforming. don't like that. I don't like that word at all because I feel like that's got a negative connotation to it. I mean, anyone who is transgender knows that they're different. Like they know that because they were different. They felt different before, and now they're trying to be who they are. So they know, but non-conforming kind of implies to me that you should conform, and if you didn't, here's your policy. Like, you know what I mean? I didn't like it, and we may have to keep it because it might just be the word, but I really, every time I saw it, I'm like, eh. And I've got a lot of experience with this population in the high school setting. We've done overnights, we've done bathrooms, we've done changing all in the past 3 months. And so I'm clear on the high school and all of that, but I'm not as clear because I did not have that experience what my kids were going through at the younger ages. So I don't have that.
And I get the sense, especially like middle school level, some have access to locker rooms and some don't. Depending on the school, they use them or don't use them. So that's where like middle school should probably be included when we're talking about locker rooms as well. But
Yeah.
In the last paragraph, last sentence of the same paragraph, the bullying harassment, second paragraph under purpose, we say request of the victim and his/her parent. I find it odd that it's a welcoming and affirming schools for transgender and gender nonconforming, but we're saying his or her.
instead
So
of
we-
his, her, there. Yeah.
So maybe there, yeah.
Yeah, I caught that. Thank you.
This is a great discussion because this is a great example of, because I don't know, our commitment 2.5 years ago was that we were going to start with the 100 series and work our way all the way through the 500 series. And this is exactly the kind of things irregardless of the topic of the policy, these are exactly the kind of things that we found was, lack of phrases used in policies that weren't properly defined. I mean, we caught a lot of things, and this is why this exercise is so important, is that it's always great to have additional voices through this, so really appreciate.
I liked, under gender identity at the bottom of page 1, the very last sentence, the responsibility for determining an individual's gender identity rests with the individual. I love that statement. I boxed it, loved it, keep it. I love it because I feel like that kind of helps with it's very hard for people to get their head wrapped around some of these concepts. Like, I've had a hard time. I've known a kid for 15 years and suddenly they've changed their name. And I've called them the same thing for like 10 or 15 years, and it's very hard for me to be like, oh yeah. But I want to respect that. It's very important to me to do that with our students. So I think it's important to say, yeah, it's not up to me to say, this is what you look like, or this is what you've always been. So it is up to that person, not their parent, not their teacher, not their chaperone, not their counselor. It's that person. I think that statement to me was very powerful. Yeah.
I'll start that line as well.
Yeah. You were copying.
For 443.6, the access to gender segregated facilities, I like that last line as well. I think that's really important. Access is provided without any additional complicated procedures. I think that's really important to make sure that it stays.
That one right there that I started to.
Oh, see?
So this section is sticky. So recently I have been to 3 different colleges. I've been to University of Maryland, Towson University, and Lebanon Valley College in the past month. And all of their buildings have bathrooms for men, women, and non-gender, or gender non-specific. However, they all kind of label it differently, or they have a different picture. You kind of know, like all of them. But I'm from Walkersville, and our building, like, we don't have a lot of things, but we definitely do not have space for a neutral location for changing or for bathroom. And those kinds of things I think we need to really talk about. And I know that's probably more in the regulations, but when we're thinking about the policy, we need to consider the facilities that we have.
I actually made a comment just generally about 0.6. Seems impractical. Because like you start going through a lot of these resolutions of like everybody's going to be comfortable, we're going to find this circumstance that does this. We run into the space of I have 300 square feet in that corner by which to make everybody comfortable. I don't know, I don't know that that is a practical goal.
Right.
So again, I think that a lot of this does require not just a bit more discussion here, but just a bit more discussion of, again, what role is FCPS playing in all of this? And what if a comfortable resolution can't be had? Whether it's a facilities problem or whatever.
And I think we have to look at, for the implementation side of that, I know that there are schools where they have to get special permission to use like the nurse's bathroom and things like that, but you have to have special permission, then you have to disclose reasons why, and that seems in contradiction to what we're asking here as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is the point you're making here is a lot of that is contradictory to that sentence. That access is provided without any additional complicating procedure.
Yeah. Like
All
again,
of those are complicated
That's-
procedures.
They could be perceived as punitive by the student.
Correct.
Depending upon the school.
Regardless of that person's gender identity.
Yeah.
I think so, because I think that there are other kids who feel like if they're uncomfortable sharing a facility, then they're penalized, or, you know, different opinions are had for them if they're not comfortable sharing a facility. And so how do they proceed forth as well without making a big deal out of something that really could just be very simple? But I think, again, I look at like Middletown High, I was there the other week, and like, it's an older building, like they don't have access for things like that.
Right. I mean, I
And
think.
we've actually had this discussion, you know, we're building a lot of new schools, thankfully. But because of space and cost constraints, even with new schools, we're not accommodating same-sex facilities or gender facilities, just due to cost.
yeah, and like I said, when a simple phrase of it seems impractical, there's no malice in that statement.
Correct.
I have the best of intentions. I just have an inability to live up to those intentions. So what do? And the policy should at least think about that. Whether it says it in the document or the document explicitly tries to work itself around, we recognize that perfect isn't going to happen. Here's our intent.
I think too, looking at the purpose, you know, we're creating affirming and welcoming schools for transgender and gender nonconforming students. A lot of the controversy surrounding this policy, I feel like, comes from the other side of my student is not transgender and is not comfortable with this person in my bathroom. And we've dealt, if you think about it at a teenage level in high school, you've been in school with this girl for so long, and all of a sudden this girl has determined that they are a boy. So now this boy is going into the boys' bathroom with the boys that have always thought of this person as a girl. And so we've had that discussion and had to figure out, okay, we're changing for a theater production. We're changing, you know, and everyone goes and changes together because it takes like 5 minutes and you gotta go. We don't have time. And then we're like, whoa, and that just happened. So we need to fix that. But we don't have the facilities, so we have to be a little creative with all of that. But I think we have to be sensitive to how we phrase those solutions or suggestions so that we are affirming all of our students at this, you know, we're looking for how can we make everyone as comfortable as we can and provide the environment that is supportive to everyone. Because like I said, I think that's where a lot of that controversy comes from, is that we're worrying about this one person, but then they're saying,
The
well, what about these
exclusion of.
30 other people?
You don't want to exclude anybody.
And if this
And
really
we're
is
not.
about, like, if this really is truly about inclusivity and
Yes.
being authentic, it means everybody sitting at this table, regardless of where we come from and what we think.
Right.
I think that's where I go back to what we said on page 1 with the placement of acknowledging and transfer. You know, for some people, that is what they would prefer.
Yeah.
Because then there isn't the, oh, they've known me for 14 years as so-and-so and now I'm so-and-so. And it's an easier thing in their head to be able to transfer and just be that person that they want to be.
Start over. Yeah.
And having that as an option versus this makes it sound like it's like a last resort, but that may be the best have
There's
for
a
them.
spectrum of solutions of which this is one of them.
Right,
Yeah.
versus this is a lot. And I understand that from a bigger level, that creates a lot of problems with the transfer process. I am fully aware.
This gets back to
But-
the, what role does FCPS see itself playing in all of this?
Well, and even the verbiage that in here,
Yeah.
it could be probably a little gentler.
Yeah, much, much softer, again, in the spectrum of ways to resolve
Right.
all of the stuff in this document. One of the things is that transfer, that I don't have to write as a punitive.
Right.
Correct.
It is an option to resolve it so that people can be,
And in fact, there may be reduction in then bullying, harassment, discomfort on all sides because they have that opportunity.
If that is an
Be authentic.
intent, yeah, if that's our intention in the policy to say this would be an option, which I didn't read it as such. But I also feel like the policy is different than what the regulations would read.
Right, and is that more of a regulation, more of a how
Yeah,
but I
versus the policy itself?
yeah.
You have to adjust the what.
but if you write this policy this way, I'm gonna come up with a way to punitively move people to resolve a problem. Like,
That's what it looks like, yeah.
I'm gonna write whatever my how around what you've told me you're trying to get to, so while it doesn't need to be in lurid detail, it does need to give me, I need to be able to look at it and be like, oh yeah, totally, I see, let me drill down to the 5 steps below that. But several of the steps that I would have in mind for how to implement wouldn't even be spoken to in this one, the way it sits. That's sort of the point.
So I guess my overall question with this whole conversation is how much of these things should be saved for regulations versus the policy discussion? Do you know what I mean?
And I think this gets to my point of, I can't write an effective regulation if my policy seems
Right.
all over the place. I need clarity in this so that when I can read through this, it makes sense. So that I can then drill down and figure out operationally, here are the 3, 4, 5 steps that I need to do to, I need to figure out how to juggle bathrooms for 50 people, and I have space for 20 people. How am I gonna do that? Well, you told me in here I should do that, so now I'm gonna come up with regulations to tell me how to work through that problem. So, that's again, I don't need the lurid detail, it's, here are problems, and from a regulation perspective, it is now go regulate it. Cool, okay, but right now I don't know what I need to regulate.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of the policies are somewhat vague, so they can be a lot more specific, but I don't think this should be one of those. I think
A little less vague. Needs to be vague, yes, a little less vague.
less vague.
A little tighter steering on it.
I mean, I think overall it's very well written, especially considering 6 years ago.
And the vast body, the changes that happened in 2019 were extremely minor. So actually, 15, 16, and 17 were the debate around this policy.
And I feel like our culture in our schools today has got to be completely different than it was in 17 and 18 and 19. So the conversation
Depends on which school.
absolutely.
Learning patterns have a different flavor from my
Oh my gosh,
observations.
they all do. Yeah.
This is excellent.
It really is. I don't want to like interrupt it. But this is exactly the kind of discussions, and these adult discussions that I would really love to be able to have between our policy committee, with our full board. That I really appreciate us treating it as what it is, versus getting all caught up in the politics and the, the ideology and that, because this is the kind of work that we really need to be able to do in order to ultimately benefit all of our students. Because I think many of the things that you were pointing out here, it doesn't matter what the gender identity is of the student. This is going to impact them. And we have to be more specific in order to provide opportunities for our staff to put regulations together which offer real solutions.
And I think from my experience, I think many staff members would appreciate more specifics as, you know, as we learn more. I think they would probably appreciate some more specifics, because I know in one of my previous roles, people would come to me and they're like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say, you know, in X, Y, and Z situation? And, you know, you can specify some and you have to kind of figure out others, but I think that many staff members would probably appreciate some more specifics on what they're supposed to do. Because I think most people want to do well and want to do right. Just have to provide them some specific information.
Through this conversation, the one thing that just popped into my head was stakeholders. What I don't have a sense for in here, and I keep going back to the there's one line that said parent and student. I'm just going to simplify it to parent and student for the sake of conversation. What are the role, like, again, FCPS has decided to stand in the middle of this conversation. Who are the stakeholders that they envision? And then it's not just the transgender student. It's also someone who doesn't identify as that. It's the administration, it's a teacher, it's a parent, and again, whether it goes into the document or whether it is simply a thought exercise that the authors of the document go through so that they can be speaking to all of those parties. Who are the stakeholders that are supposed to be addressed in this document?
I think just adding a comment about who the stakeholders are may offer some clarity to the document itself.
I didn't want to go that far.
Sorry.
No, no, like, I don't disagree, but I was like, as long as at least somebody considers it, but I think explicitly
they
stating it,
recognize
if you
that
could
this
do
is-
it clearly,
Yeah.
makes sense.
That all stakeholders, X, Y, Z,
Yeah.
you know, were considered when considering this document. Because part of what I had written down under concerns was about the multiple people who could be considered stakeholders in this.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've discussed in the past, we've discussed our policies on race relations and things like that, where we've brought in some of those concepts to include all people in the school, like including, you know, staff and parents and volunteers, and, you know, this is what we expect from our FCPS community as a whole, not just students or not just staff, but kind of as a broader community. When we're creating this welcoming environment for everyone, we have staff that are transgender, we have parents that are going to come in that are trans, you know, like we have more than, and I think this is such a new idea in the big scheme of things since public education started. You know, we've only been talking about this for the past 10 years. You know, it's not a new thing, it's a new thing to discuss. And so over the past decade, I would say it's evolved so much, and I think all the stakeholders have a different place. Like, I think parents, and I was a school counselor too, I was so happy that you said that, because the role of confidentiality, and, you know, that you can't necessarily tell a parent what you've discussed with their child, that's really distressing as a parent, you know, but there are these things. So that's an important thing to lay out. And then what is the role of a staff member? And that's a different thing than, you know, I think we don't want the policy to say that FCPS is standing in between.
And I
Because
didn't mean to imply, because that almost sounds like I'm saying FCPS is
But we need to be
interfering.
careful, but we want to make sure we're stating it that we're not.
You all have, like, FCPS is absolutely stating a position in a very contentious topic. So whether you envision yourself as a referee or a mediator in the middle or a bystander, like, that needs to be.
So in terms of the, I'm gonna stay with that for a second, because taking away the political and the controversy that surround, the hot things that surround this topic, like, we are just saying, okay, this is our policy as a school system to be inclusive of all students, right? So I think it's hard to think about these topics and leave all of that out there. And I have to really try hard to do that, because I'm hearing those things, but at the same time, I want to hear the positions that are different than mine to make sure that we address that, and so that you may not agree with me, but we both are going to feel comfortable with what's on the paper. So that's where I want us
Yeah.
to think about FCPS isn't in the middle, but if it sounds like it is, we need to fix that.
And I think that's sort of the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
Is I worry that it does read too many people. It is FCPS in the middle, particularly, again, when in this document, most of the times that it references parent and student, it's, we talk to the student, the parent, according to this document, the parent's over there someplace and we may or may not tell them anything. Is how I think a lot of people are going to read this, which then gets very political very fast. And if you don't want it to get very political very fast, that needs to be clarified.
Right.
And if there is a reason, legal, safety, whatever, that a parent is here versus here, we should probably state that, because that's where parents are getting hung up is, why does my kid know better than me and why do you know better than me?
So are any of the legal references that are on here addressing that?
There's privacy confidentiality, but I don't see legal. It just says applicable to federal, state, and local privacy and student record laws. And that's really more about,
That's more about their access.
Yes.
That
The
we're
records and
required to
stuff.
provide them access.
But are there any updated legal references regarding parental rights versus student rights?
A lot of fighting and discussion.
Correct, but I'm just thinking like from a therapeutic point of view,
Right.
like, we have certain rules that in different states that you follow in terms of when even a minor is considered in control of their records, right? And so if we
Yeah.
had a leg to stand on for Maryland
I
that
think
says
I think
this,
That's sort of what I'm getting at is,
then,
if that exists, we need to make sure that it's clear so that it isn't FCPS picking fights with everybody.
Right.
Because that's not what's happening
We're
here.
not trying to keep a secret.
No.
We're not keeping a secret from
No.
dad.
but that's
We're
how
not doing that.
I can see other
But-
parents.
This is
doing
again,
that, and I've
I
had
know
parents say that to
I
me.
know a lot of people that is exactly how they interpret it.
Yes,
And we need to diffuse that
yes.
so that we can have a conversation about, given the resources that we have and trying to make people feel safe and included, here's what we intend to do.
And I'll tell you from when I was a school counselor, like the direction that we're given is to work with the student to help them be able to, if safely able to have those conversations with the parents and be able to discuss like, okay, so if you choose to be a part of this sports team, what's gonna be the potential outcomes of that in terms of peers and parents? What do we need to do? Those kinds of conversations are part of what our job would be. But I don't know that parents are necessarily aware that behind closed doors, we're having those conversations to try and get them to bridge that gap, right? I definitely can see where you're coming from with like having a leg to stand on.
Again, this is far less about my own personal concern than it is, I know a lot of people where this is their personal concern.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, understanding like the counseling relationship, or like a nurse, the school nurses, or the trusted adults that you have that kids confide in. I mean, it could be about any topic. They talk to us about all kinds of things. Not just my pronouns, or I'm feeling like this. My boyfriend just broke up with me, or my mom grounded me, or they talk to you about a million things that you're not going to pick up the phone and call mom and dad about. This is one thing of 1,000 things that the teenagers are going to talk about, or the 10-year-olds, or anybody. And so I think it's almost, you have the confidentiality, you have those relationships that you have to respect. And I think that people get hung up on, you're going to keep this a secret from me, instead of maybe we really need to push the definition of those relationships. Like in a counseling role, it's not just this topic that they're discussing. They're discussing all kinds of things. I mean, and it's not that we're keeping this secret. Like we're protecting our relationship with the students and staff or whoever they're interacting with. But
And this is another topic.
yeah,
It isn't the, it's
Right.
one of.
it is a,
One of.
right,
It's-
one of many.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's part of this challenge.
It is, because I feel like that could diffuse some of the issues of, or Or it might inflame some people to say, well, you're not telling me anything, and my kid talks to you every week.
Yeah,
You know, and I
that's
see
been
it all
the
the
case
time.
too. If
Making
you're not gonna make
everybody happy is an
yeah,
impractical
it's not-
solution.
It's not going to.
Yeah.
But you
Trying
have
to get
be
to
clear.
good enough, but.
Good enough, yeah, I mean, it needs to be clear, and just to promote that idea of respect of all people. But I think there are some basic things that have always been in existence in the school system, with your relationship with your counselors and your admins and your, you know, all of that, and that's not any different here. I mean, my two kids have very simple names, they both go by nicknames. No one needs to call me to say, hey, Celeste,
Yeah.
Jacob just wants to be called Jake, like, he's been Jake since he was 6. Okay, like, they don't have time to call me to tell me that.
No.
It's fine. And so we don't want to slide down all of those slippery slopes, but I think it does need to be pretty clear, but include some of the privacy things, just to say, this isn't new. It's always been in existence, and, you know, that's what we're trying to do as we work with your students.
Yeah. In support of our teachers, our counselors, I think we have to reference that Maryland has some of the most liberal consent laws, particularly in regards to mental health treatment. Is very young children can privately consent to mental health treatment without the knowledge of their parents in the state of Maryland. So those are all issues we need to address in this policy that supports our teachers, counselors, administrators.
The difference that parents will argue is that school education is compulsory, and that, you know, versus mental health is a personal choice to go to whomever you want to go to, you know, if you choose to. So it's going to be a dance.
Yeah.
And I think in part, honestly, I think some of this comes down to educating parents about things, not necessarily, like, I don't know if maybe there's a quick way to put it in the policy, but I think it also comes down to a lot more education of parents of different roles. You know, I've had conversations about, you know, well, why would this administrator do this, or this? You know, and I'm like, well, like, I can tell you from being in there, these might be some of the reasons. Oh, okay, that makes more sense.
Yes.
But, you know, they get really
Yes.
hot for child to, you know, to start with without really understanding it. So that's where the parental education part comes in.
The worst phrase that we have to use all the time with parents are, it's in Comar. Because there's nothing the state likes more. You know, we talk about the school system, quote unquote, putting itself between. There's nothing more the state likes
Sure.
than putting us between
Sure.
parents, students, constituents. It's a very difficult dance that we have to make, and it's also frustrating for our administrators that all the time they have to say, it's in Comar. Why'd you do this? It's in Comar. And it's frustrating. It's a difficult dance.
I think this third sentence, under privacy, confidentiality, it might cause, oh, sorry, page 2.
Okay?
If I, a student, may wish to may report on school and disclose, that whole sentence, I feel like needs to be clarified a little bit, because I think that, based on the conversation, I think that was a little. It's a little confusing. Because then it's kind of saying two separate things.
Initially, when I was reading, I was thinking about PII.
Yes,
And
exactly.
so I had to reread
Yep.
that sentence as well.
I think people could get stuck.
It's in all honesty, probably one of the most contentious sentences in the entire policy.
Yeah.
Because those that are adamantly opposed parts of this policy use that as we're not only keeping secrets, we're encouraging secrets to be kept.
I'm going to ask about why medical information is even in there. Like, I don't understand why that staff member's not going to disclose like medical information that's unknown, because a child would have to have a different level of permissions for the medical procedures and things like that. So that part I did not understand. Or whether it's I'm going to the nurse's office, well, the nurses have their own kind of policies and procedures for what they communicate with the parents. But I don't know, that confused me.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of input, because some of this policy was written from a national perspective versus we need to reference right down to our local and state privacy laws and regulations.
feel like it could be pulled apart in like a couple different directions, that sentence, and just make it, and that would make it maybe less inflammatory
Yeah.
and make people maybe a little bit more comfortable.
Like I started that one because I like the support of the privacy piece to it. I know that some LEAs have gone to only your birth certificate name, and that's it, whole county, or whoever, you know, LEA, mostly counties, have done that. And my kids would be very upset about that because they, like I said, they have nicknames. Jacob is Jake, Cameron is Cam, and, you know, Jake does not want to be Jacob. Like, you know, like that's his choice. And I think that kind of makes me think, like, I guess we need to say something about, you know, you're allowed to be called what you want to be called. Because if we don't say that, then it's not protected, right?
I thought I read that.
So we need to think about a different approach, because that is definitely the hot topic that everybody.
It says FCPS recognizes the right for every student to be
Yeah.
referred by their preferred
It
name.
has the right of every student to
Yeah.
be referred to by their
That's-
preferred name and pronoun.
Yeah.
I like that. I mean, I think that's pretty clear.
I had something on training,
Uh-huh.
the very last section. So all FCPS personnel who work directly with students are required to participate in or have access to. I feel like training should be required, not. I feel like that's kind of a
You sent me the
caveat.
link, isn't that good enough?
Yes,
I have the
exactly.
access.
That should be, I mean, and not necessarily, oh gosh.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that all of these trainings, like all these things listed below need to be required, but something should be required that it's, you know, instead of just, you know, I have access to it, but then they don't have any interest in doing it, so.
So it used to be administrators had to follow up and make sure that those were completed. I don't know if that's changed in the last several years. I can't imagine that it has. So if it's required, they have to do it.
Yeah, the
And
way
they-
the sentence reads though.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It looks like there could be a.
I wonder if there's ones that are in this list that are determined by like the level of staff, like an assistant versus a teacher, and whether we need to also then in the regulation part of that update, like, no, if we want it to be affirming for everybody, then everybody needs to do this policy, custodians, et cetera.
Yeah.
So Sabrina, based on time, I'm thinking, this is one that's gonna linger with you. You're probably gonna think of additional things that you want to get feedback on and/or find solutions for us in language. Do we want to have them email Sabrina to you if they have additional thoughts?
Absolutely. So again, I'm going to collect this from you. But we're going to do the next policy also. In the same form.
I want to make sure we give
Yes,
the
we wanna
attention
give-
it
Yes.
deserves too.
But absolutely, the conversation will still continue at any point. And I'll also, after we complete 444, there are ways to individually give feedback also. So if you want to speak individually and give your own feedback, again, we'll talk about ways to do that you can also share out with your community. So if they want to come and personally speak or share their own personal view, there are ways to move that forward also. So why don't we go ahead and move on to 444 now, just in the interest of time, and we'll start over reading this. It's a shorter policy, but again, still with a lot of information for us to consider. In regards to- Another few minutes? No, come back as group. So, if anyone wants to share, you can start. I'll see four.
I'm really passionate about this one, so, sorry, this is my first time, but I have a lot of opinions on this one. I feel like I'm in a very privileged position with my job where I hear a lot of different things from around the county. And one of the things that I consistently hear is that there are a lot of students who don't feel like there are opportunities and experiences for them that really make them want to go to school anymore, frankly. And so I was able to attend 6th grade outdoor school this year. And this is my 3rd time in 3 years going to different outdoor schools. So I've worked with that group quite a lot lately. It's such an incredible experience, and I feel like we need more of those to engage kids in learning. I understand why changes have been made over the years with opportunities for field trips and all these other things that we can do in the schools, but I do feel like we are then pushing out a bunch of kids who don't want to be in school, which creates behavior problems, which also creates a lack of love of learning. And then I think has been a lot of changes over the years where in an effort, kind of like our last one, to better serve one population, we are leaving out a bunch of other students as well. And so I put down things about like the need for the experiences and making sure that we aren't focusing so much on one subgroup, that we're missing the actual demographic breakdowns across the county and what they need, and then putting a lot of placing emphasis on one person or group above others. And then like in the opportunity gap, I noted gender is not actually on there either. We spent all this time talking about gender, and then later on, under the policy statement, number 2, we go into more specifics there, but it's not part of what we define as an opportunity gap. And as a mom of 2 girls and a boy, I do feel like both are very important. And I know that my kids all want to be heard and seen, as all kids do, and so making sure that that's a part of it as well. I'm going to cut myself off there and probably jump in a little bit later with other people's thoughts, but I've got a lot on this one. Let other people talk.
I had a question about how marginalized population, like what input they give, like people give into this policy, like how that input, is it prioritized kind of over, not over, but in addition to, I guess, everybody else's? Because I feel like there's, to include parents and community, like how that's being, I guess, gathered. That's a rhetorical question. Like,
Yeah.
but I think that would be, I think that's something to maybe include. You know, how you're checking in with the community, of people that this would impact.
I'd say that our Special Education Advisory Council and our Racial Equity Committee need to have a lot of input as we go through this policy.
And I think that's part of what I was also bringing up, is that it's more than just that. We talk about rigor in one section, but then we don't really address that in other sections. You know, we've gotten rid of certain programs over the years, but there's not been a whole lot of staff development to replace those things. I heard from a parent recently whose child is supposed to be in one of the HOW programs, and they specifically said in the email, we don't typically communicate with parents. Okay, so that made them feel really devalued and not really understanding what their child was even receiving. That was what the whole purpose of the email was, is can you let me know how you're addressing my child's program, you know, as a HOW student? And they are basically told, we don't have conferences and talk with parents about these things, basically trust the process. And they're like, whoa, if you're working with my kid, then I want to know what you're doing. And so I think that that's one of the demographics that I'm also referring to, is that some of the emphasis has been put so much. And I think they're all very important. But there are a lot of kids who kind of been left out because of that. And if we really want to put out these kids that we say, where was it, are, you know, exceptional and having these educational experiences, then we actually, maybe this is the regulation, like we really need to kind of put our money where our mouth is and have that available and make it clear to, because I did receive a special education, you know, survey, right? So I know that that's going out there, but I never have received a HOW one, and I should, if they have one, which means they don't have one or they're not putting them out, and that should be represented, you know, all these different demographics need to be represented.
Do you mind defining that for me?
Sorry, highly able learner.
Thank you.
So instead of the magnet program,
Sure, thank you.
they're using that.
So it's acknowledging advanced learners as a special group.
Yes, because we're saying rigor, and that making sure that kids have the rigor, it says in number 3, the educational rigor they need throughout their educational career to maximize education or academic success. But we're not really always doing that at all of the levels.
Well, no, to that point, I got hung up on the policy purpose number 3. Achievement is raised for all Frederick County Public Schools students while eliminating, like, that part of the line
Eliminating the predictability to sports.
seems, like, the second part, got it, like, as a purpose. The first part seems fiscally impractical. again, how do I address, you know, both ends of the bell curve and the middle in such that everybody, I don't know any school district that does that. If it's a goal, like it's a laudable goal, but if it's utterly impractical, it sort of, it devalues some of the other stuff. You know, if you say, you know, we want every student who graduates from here to go on to be a gold medalist in whatever their topic is. If you're lucky that 2% ever achieve something like that, you've sort of devalued everything else you say by throwing out a goal that you can't. Part of it is put your money where your mouth is. The other part is some of the stuff I don't think we can say. I worry about that as an organization because you take a credibility hit when
You can't deliver.
you cannot achieve. So,
I think it's a great conversation. You know, we talk a lot about, let's use, I just throw out the example of like MCAP, which is 1 through 4. We spend so much time, and I'm hearing this from parents, we spend so much time focused on the 1s and the 2s because we get measured on that parents are like, well, what about the 4s? What about the highly able, you know, why can't we make the 4 plus? You know? So we are hearing that more and more about the rigor part of it.
I think it is a larger conversation because I think there's a lot of pressure put in different places for different numbers, and sometimes that's done by parents and sometimes that's done by the school. But really making reasonable, and I know this has been over the years, the pendulum swinging and how we evaluate all of these things and making sure that we're moving kids forward is really, and again, this goes back to we can't control FCAP. That's out of our pay grade, right? Like we just have to do it, but how we utilize that, and I understand that also comes to state down as well. But there's a couple other things that I think we established other than using one data point, and I know someone will argue with me and say there's more. But I think there's a lot of emphasis put on certain things, and we have to consider a whole child, and I think that's kind of, you know, my background is there's a lot more to it.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. I have a child in the expressions program, and my daughter is I requested, after talking to the teacher, to have her move to honors. Well, the teacher had already requested that. That's not what came back on the sheet. So then I had to send a letter. I just think that's listening to the teachers as well. There are so many, this came up last year a lot. As well. Kind of the whole spectrum of the, capabilities of the students and how to make sure everybody is supported. So.
And I think, again, that comes down to regulation too, or even how principals are, I don't know, directed, encouraged, I'm not quite sure, because it's my pay grade, as to how they, organize their classrooms, because there's a lot in that too, because I've had teachers where I've worked in there, they have non-readers up to, 3 levels above grade level in the same classroom, and is that real? Are you really able to move everybody along the way that they deserve to be moved along?
Yeah. I've experienced that with my son, for sure. Sure. Definitely, and my daughter too. Different levels of behavior, different levels of comprehension, levels of everything. And it's like one person, regardless how amazing of teachers we have, which we do have, cannot manage all of that 100% all the time. There's just no way.
Well, it leaves opening for misbehavior as well.
Yeah, and then
Whether it's boredom or it's too hard and frustration and avoidance, you get all that, and then that makes everybody not want to be in school.
Yep.
Teachers included,
No, yeah, no, absolutely.
and we talk about
You can
retention
tell-
and
it's-
the educational
you can tell.
experience,
Well, it's a multi-pronged issue that I've been harping on this since I came on board, is that because very few people pay attention to it, but I do. if you pay attention to our staffing report that we vote on every 2 weeks, the average tenure of teacher that's leaving us is 3.5 years.
And we've invested a lot of money in them, right?
Yeah.
And so let's retain people who could be really, really good in their profession.
They're coming out of, and we're having this conversation with our education departments at the university level too, is that they're not necessarily instructing, what do they call it? Classroom control, classroom management. They don't really work with their students on classroom management. They teach them how to teach English and how to teach, but they don't spend enough time with them around classroom management. And then they come out of school with all these bright and ready to go, and then they, like you said, they get into a classroom that is so diverse on a academic level of highly able learners and kids that are way behind with 28 kids, and then all in between. And we're guilty of it because of the investment we're not willing to provide for them, that we're putting them in that position. I mean, I harbor an enormous amount of guilt last year that we voted to increase class size on our teachers. And we made a motion this year to attempt to reverse that, and we're unable to do it. But that's a significant factor. It's a significant point of advocacy that we're making in Annapolis because this was specifically not included in the blueprint. The blueprint specifically excludes classroom size and it frankly ignores it. I believe, based upon studies that are not accurate to the United States, what we face on an educational level in comparison to other places. It's just like that. That's the classroom that our teachers are facing.
I would love to see something put in here, and maybe this isn't the right one, but about mental health as well, because you're talking about what the teachers need to train at the university level and understanding adolescent, child mental health and trauma and things like that. And I do know that they have trainings, but it's frankly just not enough. And I think that when you have that, I mean, I'm a big Maslow before Bloom kind of person, right? You meet the basic needs and then you can get into all of the other academic stuff. And so we need to have teachers who are prepared and trained and able and supported to do those things so that our kids can thrive.
We don't have the foundational things where we can't get the rest.
So including social emotional learning as a call out. Because there's a section in here about what the board directs the superintendent to do. And I think you're saying there are diverse needs for every child.
There are, and I'll tell you, like I've got a student who I was working with at one middle school who I think probably would have done well at a different middle school just because of the different training or maybe demographics or familiarity with this child's challenges compared to where they were, because that school is more focused on these types of challenges over here, which is great. They need to be well versed in those, but that left this child to the point where they actually are now being homeschooled because that school could not provide the mental health support that was necessary. I had 4 kids in 2 weeks who left the public school system because related to mental health stuff. I've never had that many in that short period of time. And that was really distressing to me as a therapist and as a parent, as a former employee of the school system.
Other feedback on the policy?
I did love, since I've been really sort of negative constructive, implementation, but that kind of ties back to what we just talked about with our last policy of making sure that our new construction is able to kind of meet those needs. And as well.
Pedagogy might need to be a different word.
Yeah. That one probably the whole places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Section D, 2B. More like lay language. Use
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Instructional
Yeah.
strategies.
And I think to address, we were talking about A, number 3 on the first page, to ensure that achievement is raised. I actually crossed that out and put prioritized because you're not gonna raise the 5.0 weighted GPA of your high school senior. Like, you can't, because that's serious. But, if you prioritize all of the educational achievement, that's good enough for me as a parent. And as an educator, I would be, that's my goal, right, is to prioritize everyone in the way that I can, according to my policy on equity.
That's a great catch. I love that. It's a policy purpose word.
Yeah.
Prioritized versus raised. Love that.
I think for G, where it says identify partnerships with stakeholders, so section D to G, I guess what are you gonna do with that information then? You know, you're identifying them, but are you gonna incorporate it somehow, or? I think just expanding on that. I started that line because I really like it, but I think it needs to be kind of the action items after that.
Anything else regarding the policy language, like conversation changing?
I will say one of the things I like is section D, the fact that it said, does this policy, program, practice, decision, or action worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences?
Yeah.
I really liked the idea that something is like, I'm gonna say something, and it's totally gonna address this, and it might break something else.
Yeah.
So let's, I really did like,
Yeah.
that it was cognizant of the fact that something else might fall apart.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a decision to elevate this. If I only have $50 to spend, what's not getting done?
Right.
Like, that to me does give credence to we recognize we can't hit perfect. We recognize that some things will go wrong. But so much of the other is, we're going to try to do all of the right things in all of these ways, but we do still recognize. And I thought that was very fancy. I don't often say in a policy.
No, I agree.
I liked D2F as well, about the new construction design, but the other thought that I had about it was, it doesn't necessarily state that 21st century learning environments has to do with technology. I think it's just kind of keeping up with what the needs are in the 21st century. Because frankly, I think we could kind of cut out some of our technology and use, that money somewhere else for other things. Because I think a lot of teachers would be way on board with that. But I like how it does. It accesses 21st century needs, not just technology.
No, it's the learning environment of which some of it could be.
D2F.
Okay.
We have different, we have kids are kids, but there's also a difference in our kids now. There's similarities and differences.
In C number 3, I questioned the phrase, at the right moment on the second line there. The board is committed to ensuring the students have access to resources and educational rigor they need. I felt like at the right moment, sort of a subjective, almost like a judgmental, well, I don't know, was that the right moment? Or maybe tomorrow's gonna be the right moment, and who decides what the right moment is? So I was actually thinking maybe we just skip that, cut that at the right moment out. In my mind, it made more sense that way, just because we want to ensure that students have access to all of that stuff and the appropriate academic, social, and economic supports are in place. But at the right moment, just kind of didn't
Why
fit.
not just the resources and educational rigor they need?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to that point, I didn't really understand A2, where it says full participation and representative government.
Yeah, but
I didn't know what
I'm sorry, give me that again.
they were. A2,
How did I miss that?
full participation and representative government. I didn't know what that was. At the end of the sentence.
I think in my head I was I guess transitioning that from the public school setting
To, like,
to
be a
working out in the
citizen.
public.
A citizen, yeah.
Yeah, so
like
because
that's how I took it.
Like citizenship.
out
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
world
yeah.
of
Maybe we
diverse
should just call it citizen.
citizenship. Right.
Representative government.
Yes.
It's really good. We're trying to turn them into
don't want that.
So I'm like, well, they may or may not vote, but they will live in the world.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
D again, F, the construction one. It bothers me a little bit that we talk about a building to be 21st century, or we learning environment, but we don't talk about class size at all on this, which to me is also a learning environment. We talk about the physical structure, which is 21st century, but one of my class sizes are way too big, and so, which is like an understatement, right? But I just didn't like they called out like physical learning environment instead of like the atmosphere of the environment, like the academic part of it.
While I understood that it was speaking of like new construction or renovation of existing facilities, the physical building,
Yeah.
I read it as in support of the educational environment. And to me, I think the clarity is lacking because I wrote into it in my own mind that it's the technology and the class size, like that the building could support
Sure.
what the learning environment needed to look like, whether that was from a cognitive perspective or have enough bathrooms perspective
Sure.
or whatever.
Yeah.
But I
get
don't
what
think
you're
the
saying.
document lacks
Yeah.
saying, for example.
Yeah, I think it's a little more resonant to me because of Yellow Springs being built soon, and probably over capacity already before it's built. So, I get what you're saying.
So
That, are we gonna build
this is I agree with you, and I think the challenge is that it leaves a lot open to interpretation because it shouldn't just be technology. It shouldn't just the class size is a
Yeah.
consideration. What I maybe a little bit of peeling back the onion of what goes into considering. Like what are pieces of the consideration when we talk about these new facilities or facility renovations? Like,
Would that
what-
be in the regulation though?
I don't.
That's the how, right? That the considering.
So, I'm sorry, so the what, Chris, to offer, because then I think I read this and just assume it's written here because we do it, but you're talking about something that's lacking from F, but if you look over at A, we need to be calling out equitable staffing, because staffing is what drives class size. And that's a critical resource.
Sure.
It's just not listed there, which is odd to me.
Yeah.
It seems like we're like avoiding the third rail that they've told us it's not important. But we know it is.
Classes can hold 50 kids either, like, oh, larger classrooms
Yeah.
for larger class sizes, like,
Yeah.
no, thank you.
Part of the challenge there would be, what is the nature of the way that they're learning in a classroom required more like laboratory space?
Correct.
Where you suddenly do need more square
Right.
footage, but that square footage could be misallocated as a classroom for 50 kids. Like,
My daughter's orchestra class will have 70 middle schoolers in it next year. 70 with one adult. Wrap your mind around that one. There's barely
I'm
enough
still
room
wrapping
for
my mind around
60.
her field trip, so. I'll get to that next year.
I mean, if
That blew his mind already.
It did, I was like,
70 middle schoolers, I mean, come on.
That's nuts.
crazy.
I do want to be cognizant of time this evening, so thank you all.
It gets away
Yeah,
from you.
So, next steps, let's talk about that just briefly. There's a policy committee meeting coming up where I will gather this information and share with policy committee your words on the and your thinking in regards to this feedback. So thank you for participating. Pretty short. Mr. Rose is also going to ask everybody on the committee to review this meeting again because it was recorded and the conversation was fabulous. So again, thank you for your input. Policy committee meeting is the 21st of May, and then in the evening, and that's at 9:30 in the morning, but in the evening, there's also a board meeting that people have opportunity to give public comment And both of these policies have been ongoing public comment communication. So it will continue again. There'll be a June policy committee meeting. There'll be two June board meetings that, again, opportunities are available for feedback. For policy committee, and I'll send this in the email when we send out information about the regulation committee, but if you wanted to give feedback, again, to share, there's ways to share your individual comments, written, or to come and publicly give public comment. So also, please talk to your constituent, your people in your community to gather additional feedback, because this, as Mr. Rose says, will be an ongoing conversation for policy committee and for the board. So having your feedback to share with them, again, will continue the conversation through CAC, through our ongoing meetings also.
And our next meeting is September, but to be determined date. It is
September
the
8th.
September 8th?
September 8th
Okay, great.
is our next meeting. We'll share the rest of the meeting date also in that follow-up email so that you'll have them. There are 4 scheduled for next year, so once a quarter. So the dates will be shared. Any questions about next steps or?
If I were to entertain considering the regulation committee, you said it's 2 hours a month. Is there already predetermined day of the week that they?
Yeah, there is a schedule. It's Wednesdays, typically, I believe, 9:30 to 11:30.
Yes.
And it's non-board meeting weeks, I believe.
Okay, there you go.
But we can get that.
Day of the week is more important for my scheduling purposes than anything else.
I can tell you have a regulation review kind of mind. I love that you are yourself.
Yes.
No, it's amazing.
Sorry.
And yes, it is Google Meet,
Can't go
but
wrong.
every month. So like I said, it'd be about 8 times a year.
And at our next meeting in September, we
You
also,
wrote her name down right.
M-A-N-D-I.
at our next meeting in September, we also, our bylaws state that's when we have elections for chair. Oh, no, you can't close that yet. For secretary, which we're hoping you will say, yeah, I'm done. Thank goodness it's over. So, yes, we will be talking about elections at that point. Again, we'll send out information in advance of that meeting, but if you're interested, there's great information that can be shared from both Celeste and Lindsay and Chris in regards to the expectations, what's been done, or if they want to continue, what that would look like. So, keep that in mind.
Clearly, people are knocking down the door.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope this next group that we have brought on board, and I hope you found this particular exercise valuable, because this is how I see your contribution for us.
Oh, if I could do a cartwheel right now, I can't. But if I could, I have been like this is what I feel like we're here. So this is what we're supposed to do. So I'm so happy to be able to have these conversations and focus on what we're doing as our mission and what we've been called to do by the Board of Education. Like, this is a super important, essential piece to the big, huge puzzle that SCPS is, right? So it's an honor to be here. I'm so excited that everybody's here and we have this amazing meeting.
Yeah, Celeste and I have been here since kind of the beginning, so watching it like evolve from what it started as to this is like, Mr. J would be so happy. He was
Yes.
like school board person.
We've had a lot of
This is, like,
faith. A lot of faith,
yeah,
right?
we're
We
like,
just,
we're gonna stick it
we're
in.
gonna keep going.
Yes, thank you for hanging in there, but this is what my perception of what the
Fabulous.
CAC should be. And as I said prior, I really appreciate your honesty and your willingness to share as a group.
Yeah, I'm
Do you want me to adjourn?
Yes, we need to, is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn? Anyone want to adjourn the meeting?
I motion.
Motion?
Oh, yes.
Second?
Second.
Great.
All right, I'm like, nobody wants to adjourn.
Thanks.
We just walk out.
Yeah.